From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Gimba Umar.
Hello and welcome. All Progressives Congress files application at Supreme Court for review of the court's judgment, which sacked its governorship candidate in Bayelsa less than 24 hours before his inauguration. House of Representatives seeks appointment of more Supreme Court justices in the face of multiple cases and need to improve the speed of justice. Minister of Information Lai Mohammed insists that President Muhammadu Buhari will not resign over rising cases of insecurity in the country. And court sentences President Donald Trump's longtime advisor and ally, Roger Stone, to 40 months in prison over obstruction and witness tampering. Plus, business, sports and news from Abuja, the EFCC, and later, international news from our London studios.
On business news tonight, NNPC cuts March official selling price for Bonny Light and Kwa Ibo crude as Brent nears $60 per barrel.
On sports news tonight, Roger Federer announces his withdrawal from a number of tournaments, including the French Open, after undergoing surgery on his right knee.
And from Abuja, President Buhari asked religious leaders to sensitize Nigerians on family issues as he identifies its importance for national development.
Tonight, indications emerged that the Supreme Court may witness more calls for a review of its judgment as the ruling All Progressives Congress, the APC, files an application asking, of course, the court to reverse its decision disqualifying the party's candidate in the last governorship elections in Bayelsa State. The party's legal team, headed by Mrs. Wole Olanipekun and Lateef Fagbemi, wants the Apex Court to set aside what they call the wrong interpretation given to its judgment of February the 13th, 2020. The party is contending that the Supreme Court misinterpreted the November the 12th, 2019 judgment of the Federal High Court in Abuja, which it affirmed. They argued that the Supreme Court acted without jurisdiction and denied the party fair hearing when it proceeded to disqualify its governorship candidate, even though the Federal High Court, in the judgment by Justice Iyang Ekwo, which the Apex Court affirmed, refused the plaintiff's prayers to disqualify its candidate, Mr. Leon. The APC also faulted the interpretation given to the Supreme Court's judgment by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, in deciding to issue a certificate of return to the candidate of the People's Democratic Party, the PDP. It adds that it was wrong for the Supreme Court to have voided its candidate's participation in the election when the judgment by the Federal High Court disqualifying its deputy governorship candidate was stayed, as at when the elections was conducted. No date has been fixed for the hearing of the application. Meanwhile, it is not the APC who is only talking about this. There's been a call for a review of the Supreme Court's verdict as well. The party's sacked deputy governor-elect in Bayelsa, Senator Biobarakuma Degi Eremienyo, is also heading back to the Apex Court. Senator Degi Eremienyo insists that the Apex Court never gave him an opportunity to defend his educational qualifications before concluding that they were forged. He therefore wants the police to investigate the allegations of forgery against him.
The event of my disqualification is distressing and traumatized to me personally, and of course, a greater trauma inflicted on my party, the governorship candidates, and the good people of Bayelsa State, who signified their choice of who should be their governor and deputy governor. It is this unsolicited assault on my personality and reputation by the judgment in question that has constrained me to chart this course of action. Let me start by saying that I condemn in strong terms all forms of forgery, impersonation, or criminality in any form by the political class, and I have never been associated with same. All the educational qualifications I presented to the Independent National Electoral Commission to aid my constitutional qualification were acquired by me personally from institutions here in Nigeria, which fortunately for us all are still in existence till date. The records are verifiable anytime, any day here in Nigeria.
Staying with the judiciary but taking a lead from the House of Representatives, where lawmakers passed a resolution today to ask the federal government to recruit more justices of the Supreme Court. The motion was raised as a matter of urgent public importance by the chairman, House Committee on Judiciary, Onoffiok Luke. According to him, there are 13 Supreme Court justices who cannot constitute two panels, as 7 justices are required by the Constitution to form a panel. Our correspondent Terry Kumi reports.
At the final plenary session of the week in the Green Chamber, a matter of urgent public importance on the need to urge the federal government to recruit more justices of the Supreme Court is raised.
As a result of its original and appellate jurisdiction over the entire country, the Supreme Court is faced with the huge responsibility of handling volume of cases with minimal number of justices.
There are currently 13 Supreme Court justices who have to work extra hours to meet up with pending cases. The lawmakers unanimously resolved that more justices should be appointed. Meanwhile, when a bill which emanated from the Senate is presented for second reading, one of the lawmakers opposes it.
Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Polytechnic Bill, you are setting up a bill to a senatorial zone that have already a polytechnic. At this point, no member can speak against any bill at the second reading, but rather speak on the merits and the general principles of the bill. Federal character principles rest on the spirit of equity, justice, and fairness.
No, you are trying to mislead the House. That's why I'm here, to guide you. I'm supposed to guide you. No, I'm supposed to guide you. No, you are quoting wrongly. Oh, thank you. I'm being very fair to you. Please take your seat. Please take your seat. I think if we can establish more and more institutions, and if the government can fund it, so be it.
The bill being opposed by Mr. Osai is for the creation of a federal polytechnic in Orogun Delta State, which is sponsored by the Deputy President of the Senate. And both men are from Delta State, but different constituencies. Mr. Osai alleges that a similar bill for the creation of a polytechnic in Kwale, Delta State, which he sponsored, was dropped by the Senate. When the bill is put to vote and adopted, Mr. Osai vents his anger and stages a walkout.
Those in favor of the bill say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. No, you can't come here. You can't. The people of my own federal constituency, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the
bill is then referred to the Committee of the Whole for consideration. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, the EFCC, today announced the arrest of Mr. Muhammad Audu. He is indeed the son of the former governor of Kogi State, Abubakar Audu, for his alleged involvement in fraud. The commission says that the suspect was arrested on February the 18th for alleged diversion of personal use funds donated to the Nigerian Football Federation, the NFF. The EFCC claims its investigations reveals that the suspect allegedly used 2 of his companies, Mediterranean Hotels Limited and Mediterranean Sports, to divert the funds which he could not account for. The suspect, according to the commission, will soon be charged to court as soon as investigations are concluded. But we're not done with legal stories. Mariam Sandal, a lot of people remember her. She is the Abuja-based woman sentenced to death by hanging on January the 28th for killing her husband. She has approached the Court of Appeal in Abuja with an application asking the appellate court to set aside her conviction. In the appeal, Mariam Sanders says that the trial judge was tainted by bias and prejudices, which led to her being denied her rights to fair hearing and her consequent conviction based on circumstantial evidence. She claims that this is despite the reasonable doubt that was created by evidence of witnesses, lack of confessional statements, absence of murder weapon, lack of corroboration of evidence, and lack of autopsy reports to determine the true cause of her husband's death. She explains that the judgment of the trial court was completely a miscarriage of justice. She wants the court to allow her appeal, set aside her conviction and sentencing, and also acquit her. In the meantime, a Lagos High Court sit-in today convicted and sentenced a part-time lecturer at the University of Lagos, Hafiz Barua, to 21 years in prison for raping an 18-year-old girl who was seeking admission into the universities. Now, Mr. Barua was convicted on a one-count charge of rape brought against him by the state government. The trial judge, Justice Josephine Oyefeso, held that the prosecution has proven its case beyond reasonable doubt and therefore found the defendant guilty of the charge. In his plea for mercy before sentencing, the counsel to the convict pleaded for the tamper of justice with mercy. The victim's father, who was a friend of the convicted lecturer, had sought his help to secure admission for his daughter into the institution when the incident happened. And away from legal matters now, the federal government is insisting that President Muhammadu Buhari will not resign over the rising cases of insecurity in the country. The Minister of Information and Culture, Mr. Lai Mohammed, says that the government will also not go back on its plans to regulate the social media. But he admits that the nation is currently going through security challenges, though.
The nation's security challenge is drawing attention as reports of attacks by bandits and insurgents continue to dominate conversations. This has led to calls for the sack of the service chiefs and, in some cases, the call on the president to resign from office. But the federal government is insisting that will not happen.
Yes, we have security challenges, but the good news is that we're tackling them head on. But the challenges of security are actually being aggravated by fake news and disinformation in particular. Those behind this campaign of fake news and disinformation have also deployed new tactics, top of which is the recycling of old items and videos.
The minister insists that fake news is being used as a tool to escalate the insecurity in the country.
I want to advise all commentators, especially political and religious leaders, to be very careful at this time, not to aggravate the situation with incendiary comments that cast on our religious, ethnic, and political fault lines to further divide the country. The kind of comments that have been attributed to some leaders recently, especially religious leaders, are incendiary and reckless. Leaders should be part of solutions to problems rather than aggravating situations. To those asking Mr. President to resign, I wish to say this very clearly. Mr. President will not resign. He has the overwhelming mandate of Nigerians to preside over the affairs of the country, the expiration of his tenure on 29th of May 2023.
The minister warns Amnesty International against casting itself into what he called the League of Terrorists by attributing the atrocities of the insurgents to the Nigerian military.
In part two, after the break, we'll examine some of the recent challenges in the fight against insurgency, and we'll be joined by Mr. Bulama Bukati, a conflict and security analyst. Stay with us.